Did you ever read Harry Potter and think to yourself, this story and these characters they don't make any sense? Do you ever think to yourself, wow, I'm so much better and smarter than every other person alive? Are you me? But in all seriousness, it doesn't take a genius to see that Harry Potter is full of inconsistencies. And no, I'm not really doing this as a whole actually, Harry should have time traveled back to when he was a baby and then killed Voldemort. Because I get it, the little things, they don't really matter. And if Harry did that, there wouldn't be a story to tell. But if you ever read the books and thought to yourself, man, it's kind of weird that a giant snake can go through the walls of Hogwarts without anyone noticing, then this video is for you. Now, honestly, a lot of the things that I want to mention are just rule of cool. Cool things are cool, and we like cool things. It's so much better to have an owl bring you your mail rather than having wizard email or something, I wouldn't even be making this video except that J.K. Rowling loves to tell people that she had the entire series planned out from the beginning. Sure you did, J.K. That's exactly why you wrote a horrible, horrible play about how, oh no, if they use time turners, actually, Voldemort would win. But of course, her retcons in the actual series were thankfully nowhere near as weird as the things that she started to change after the series was over. Did it Nagini, Voldemort's pet attack snake, did she really need to be an animagus? That's weird. Why didn't they bring that up in the actual series? And then of course JK's like, oh yeah, actually I had that plan from the beginning, just believe me, bro. And just to be clear, this video is only going to focus on the original books. I'm not going to be examining every plot hole that happens in the movies, and certainly not every plot hole that was introduced with Fantastic Beasts, which I'm sure is many. But if we're going to do this properly, we need to start at the beginning. I'm talking Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Wait, sorry, I made a mistake. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. There we go. That's the right one. Wait. Sorry, hold on. Harry Potter und der Stein des Weisen. There we go. That's the one I want to talk about. And you know what? This is a perfect moment to comment on how weird the covers look to me in other countries. Okay, I get it. I grew up with the American version, so of course that version looks the best to me. But man, the UK version it looks weird to me. And I don't know what the heck's going on with the French version. Are they pilgrims? Seriously. And then we go to the German version. Harry's all angular and crazy looking. And then Finland. I don't even know what to say about Finland. But the thing that really makes me sad is that they don't actually produce these covers anymore. They have new ones, at least for the American and UK versions. They got rid of them, and they didn't even ask me for permission. Unacceptable. Completely unacceptable. Okay, so right away this book starts out completely wrong even in just the first chapter. J.K. Rowling wrote the beginning of the story takes place on a dull gray Tuesday, but 1981, November 1st was a Sunday, you big dummy. Just kidding. Anyways, that's a great example of the sort of plot holes that I don't want to talk about. There's an extremely large number of these, and while they're documented really well on the Harry Potter wiki, I just don't think they're interesting, and so I'm not going to bring them up besides this one. Now, one of the very first things I do want to talk about is something that's bothered me since I was a kid watching this series, which is how very little is actually done to improve Harry's treatment by the Dursleys. Even at the start of the first book, McGonagall mentions how horrible the Dursleys are, but Dumbledore just prattles on like he always does about how they're his family, blah blah blah, family's important. Saying that family is important seems like it's Dumbledore's catchphrase practically. Now, of course, from later on in the series, we know that his family offers him a powerful protection from Voldemort, but conveniently that's never explained until later. Meanwhile, poor Harry's being abused in almost a comically horrible fashion. I know he's forced to live in a broom cupboard, and as an adult I can say this is child abuse, full stop. But as a kid I always thought, hey, that's kind of cool, maybe I want to live in a broom cupboard. But no, it's abuse, and the fact that Dumbledore didn't see anything wrong with this, at least, he didn't do anything about it until much later, when Harry was about to go to Hogwarts, that's not good. There's also some general problems with Hogwarts itself I want to talk about before we get into the real meat and potatoes. You know how people are always saying that Hogwarts is one of the safest places in the wizarding world? Oh, right. Who could forget about Hogwarts also having, I don't know, giant three-headed dogs, trolls literally roaming throughout the school, and all other kinds of insane shenanigans? Clearly, Hogwarts is not safe. It's also implied in the book that there are literally thousands of students attending Hogwarts, but by my estimation, there's no more than like 300 at most. Harry himself only shares a dormitory with 4 other boys, and it's also hard to imagine 1,000 students even fitting into the Great Hall. But what's worse is that hardly any other students are even mentioned in the books. Like, I get it, it's hard to have a big cast in a story, so that makes sense. But you also at the same time can't claim that you have thousands of students when clearly there just isn't any room. The main plot revolves around Harry and, his 2 good friends, Ron and Hermione Granger, trying to figure out what the stone is and how to protect it from Snape, whom they think is trying to steal it. You're off to a really good start in your book when you're writing that 11-year-old children are protecting some sort of like mysterious ancient artifact. And then you have the problem that nothing about the stone itself actually makes any sense. Just the powers of the stone are completely wild. Infinite gold and infinite life. Now, this is going to be a running theme where JK kind of like writes herself into a corner by making magical objects and artifacts too powerful, so stay tuned. Anyways, aren't galleons literally made out of gold? How did this not crash the entire gold market? But anyways, Nicholas Flamel gives the stone to Dumbledore, who then proceeds to hide it behind obstacles and challenges so easy that even first-year students could get past them. I mean, really, like, the first challenge is just using Alohomora on a door, and they didn't even bother to add any kind of like security. Like, you think they would be like, oh yeah, let's open this door, and then it'd be like boo boo boo, there'd be like flashing red lights and stuff, and Dumbledore's wand would start vibrating or something. I've seen people saying that Dumbledore did this as bait, but that doesn't make any sense either. I guess I have to give credit at least to the giant 3-headed dog, but did no one think about this thing's comfort? You have this giant animal trapped in a little tiny baby room, and it didn't have any like yard to use, I'm really wondering maybe if Quirrell had to, he had to like vanish some stuff before opening that trap door. Some of the other challenges though, like this plant monster, are so trivial that they can even be defeated by shining light onto. And come on, don't even get me started on the chess match. Either Ron is a chess prodigy or this thing was set to Stockfish level 1. But this leads us to perhaps even the worst challenge, the Mirror of Erised. And did you know that Erised is desire spelled backwards? Oh boy, that's so clever. And did you guys know that Ekans is snake spelled backwards? I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself. I had to say that. Now, Dumbledore very specifically tells us that only one who wants to get the stone but doesn't want to use it can actually, get it. And this perfectly describes our young, brave hero, Harry Potter. But you know who else it describes? Quirrell. Quirrell doesn't want the stone for himself, you dummies. He wants it for Voldemort. Now, I guess you can argue that because Voldemort's ugly mug is lodged into the backside of Quirrell's skull, they're the same, but, whatever. And I think the whole thing's stupid because, like, if the stone's so dangerous for it to be left alone, why didn't they just destroy it? That's what they do at the end of the movie, they destroy it. Man, Dumbledore is so stupid. They should rename him to something like Dumb as a Door. Okay, yeah, Dumb as a Door. Great. I got him. Good one. And, I have to ask, why did Dumb as a Door even think it was a good idea to hire Quirrell in the first place? How could he and the entire staff of the school possibly miss that Quirrell was being possessed by Voldemort? Why was no one suspicious that the troll was loose? That was like Quirrell's job. Why did they not have basic security screening in Hogwarts to detect, I don't know, Voldemort's face? And I am being a little bit unfair here because Snape did suspect Quirrell of something, but if that's true, why didn't Dumbledore do anything about it? Dumbledore should have had protections against this. Voldemort's probably like the primary person who would want to steal the stone. And why does Dumbledore not find it alarming that some wispy evil spirit is floating around the Forbidden Forest, sucking the blood out of unicorns? Who could this possibly be? Voldemort? No, it's not Voldemort, you big idiots. And why is this considered an acceptable punishment? Does this really sound like something normal you would do for detention? It's like, oh yeah, you're chewing gum in class, Timmy, you know, you're gonna have to go up, pick up demon dung in hell now. You know, go through the hell portal. I'd also like to point out that this would have been a really great time for Quirrell / Voldemort to kill Harry, but all they did was kind of menacingly look at him. So Dumbledore really is dumb as a door. Not only did he incompetently hide the stone, but he also let a crazy person work at a school. And you know what? That's gonna be a theme going on here, okay? This is a theme. For me, Chambers of Secrets is a bit of an odd man out, so to speak, in the series. We don't really meaningfully advance the narrative in any way compared to the other books, but I do enjoy the mystery behind what the monster of Slytherin could be. And also, this is like the only Harry Potter book that like really scared me as a child. I don't know if that's something other people experienced. I think maybe a lot of people were really scared of the Dementors. I know I was too, but this one really freaked me out. Like, I was actually so scared of the basilisk that I would run out of the room and hide while it was on screen. Now, the biggest plot hole in this book, it's not so much of a plot as it is a snake, and not so much of a hole as it is giant pipes in Hogwarts, apparently. Okay, so let's say there are giant pipes in Hogwarts. I don't know why they need that much water. Maybe there's a lot of doo-doo floating around in there. Who knows? But how does no one notice this thing going through the wall? It would generate vibrations, you know? You would be able to feel this thing through the floor probably. And how does the basilisk even exit the pipes? Okay, I know they showed it in like the movie. It's coming out of this big central thing in the bathroom. But what about when it attacks people who are far away from the bathroom? Does it just slither through the hall completely unnoticed? Also, does it have like x-ray vision? Like, how does it know where to go to attack mudbloods? And I've seen people saying that the basilisk can shrink, and I don't believe that at all, okay? The basilisk cannot shrink. That's not possible, okay? And then we have Moaning Myrtle. She never saw Ginny or the basilisk coming out of the bathroom that she supposedly haunts. And then we're supposed to believe that somehow the only people attacked by the basilisk didn't even die. I think a lot of people forget looking in the eyes of the basilisk is supposed to kill you. I guess J.K. Rowling hadn't put on her big girl boots yet when she started killing characters willy-nilly in the last book. Because the only character she killed off in this book was Moaning Myrtle in the past. And again, I really have to ask, what is Dumbledore doing for this entire book? Is Hermione actually smarter than Dumbledore? I think she is. And we can't forget that this book is also conveniently the first time we're introduced to a Horcrux, even though we didn't know it at the time. Now, I believe that J.K. Rowling had planned Horcruxes the entire time, about as much as I believe that Itachi was supposed to be a good guy from the start in Naruto. This whole bit with the I am Lord Voldemort thing is also just goofy as hell. And did anyone else find it just completely ridiculous that Harry pulls a giant sword out of a hat and then stabs the basilisk through the roof of its mouth? Harry's scrawny looking butt probably couldn't even pick up a sword, let alone stab it through the jaw of a giant snake. And I could say this for a lot of battle scenes in these books, but I really wish Harry had used more magic. Like, I get it. Voldemort took Harry's wand, so he can't cast any spells. But why have Voldemort take Harry's wand? It's not like he knows any spells that would let him instantly defeat the basilisk. What's even worse about this is that now I'm questioning why Voldemort didn't cast any magic on Harry. And in fact, the only spells that Harry seems to actually know are the Patronus Charm and Expelliarmus, his signature attack. In a story about wizards, you'd think he'd have a little bit more of a repertoire. But anyways, I'm not done ranting about the basilisk. Do you remember how Hagrid got blamed for the basilisk killing someone because of his giant pet spider? Why were people so stupid that they thought that a giant spider would kill someone like a basilisk? Like, did they not look for spider bite marks? And then another thing is, in the duel between Harry and Malfoy, when Harry spoke Parseltongue, everyone heard hissing, right? They made a big deal about Oh no, Harry's an icky poopy stinky head who has snake cooties. So why is it when a giant snake is gliding through the walls talking about killing people that Ron and Hermione don't hear hissing when the basilisk is speaking? And honestly, it doesn't even make sense that Hogwarts would even have plumbing. It'd make a lot more sense if the toilets simply vanished whatever you deposited into them. And in fact, JK said in a tweet, wizards used to like just, do their business wherever and then vanish the evidence afterwards. Imagine Ron and Harry going down the hallway when Ron all of a sudden, he feels the urge and he announces, "Harry, I must do a wizard poo." I like to think that they have to do a little speech before they take, one of their special little wizard dumps. Now, the other major problem in Chamber of Secrets besides the basilisk is Lockhart. Lockhart is completely and utterly incompetent as a teacher and also evil and has been stealing people's accomplishments. And I just have to ask, why did they make Lockhart evil, like at the very end of the book? He spends almost the entire book as comic relief, and then at the very end, he's revealed to actually be evil or something. It makes him seem like he's the stupidest villain ever. Like, if he knew he was bad at magic, why would he constantly try to perform it in front of people? If I was him, I would do my hardest so that people wouldn't see me do magic. Anyways, he's a minor antagonist for all of one chapter before he uses Ron's wand and obliviates himself. So the entire thing feels pointless anyways. And now I have to point out what I've been wanting to point out this entire video. Every single Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher, except for Lupus, ends up being a villain. And so I think it would have been nice if Lockhart could have just been left as comedic relief. Just have Dumbledore fire him at the end of the semester or something for being incompetent. But again, I don't understand how he was even accepted into Hogwarts in the first place. Did they not do interviews? Seriously, did they not ask him basic questions about the subject he was supposed to be teaching? Dumbledore could have asked him one question and probably learned that he knows nothing. And then the worst part is okay, maybe they don't do interviews and they just assume Lockhart's great because of his, infamous deeds. But as soon as he started teaching, why didn't Schlumbledore notice that he didn't know anything? Does Dumbledore not go to the classes to see what the teachers are actually teaching? Okay, so even if he did go around obliviating people, why wouldn't their friends and families or even the acquaintances that they knew speak up? So Lockhart being a villain is dumb. And what would have even happened if the Tom Riddle from inside of Voldemort's diary would have actually come back? Wasn't there this whole thing with him becoming stronger as Ginny died? Would he have competed with the real Voldemort to be the alpha male of the Voldemorts? There's the old one and then there's the young one, and they're gonna compete. Or maybe they're just gonna start the Dark Wizards podcast together or something. So we arrive at the third book, Prisoner of Azkaban. I don't have a lot to say about this one. I think for a lot of people though, this is their favorite book in the series. And while it's not actually mine, I can see why so many people like it. Actually, I was talking to my wife about this book, and she told me that the only reason people like this book is because Sirius Black is hot, and I don't really know what to think about that, honestly. Now, for people who aren't my wife, I think the climax of this book really stands out in the series. It seems like everything's going to shit, and then we get a big ol' redo and they get to make things right. I also really like that it's not a complete victory and that Sirius still has to go into hiding at the end. The only thing that taints it for me personally is the fact that the really cool part was done using a time turner. At the very least, I will concede that the time travel could have been a lot worse. I'm looking at you, cursed child. So this is the book we find out that Harry is a gigantic baby because he cries over the Dementors. There's no way he's the only one who has a traumatic past because of Voldemort. Most of the kids he's going to school with probably have similarly traumatic pasts because of the war. Neville Longbottom, anyone remember Neville? Parents tortured to death by Death Eaters, yeah? And before you tell me, actually, Neville wasn't there. Okay, yeah, sure. But how does Harry remember? He was a baby! And honestly, this argument wouldn't even bother me that much, but people always say that Harry couldn't see the Thestrals until he saw Cedric's death because he was a baby and he doesn't remember his parents' death. Okay, so which is it? Now, one of the biggest problems people have had with this book is the Marauders map. It's really curious, I guess, how Fred and George never noticed that someone named Peter Pettigrew was sleeping in the same bed as their beloved little brother. And we all know that you can, in fact, see Peter on the map because that's the whole reason Lupin goes to the Shrieking Shack. And how was Ron not more traumatized by this? If I found out that my pet rat was actually a fully grown man and I'd been sleeping with that rat, I would have been traumatized for life. So I don't actually want to talk about time turners here specifically, but more about why Hermione even needs a time turner for this book. Now, apparently it's because there was a conflict with the classes that she wanted to take. And Hermione is a special little smart girl and she needs to take more classes than other people. But on that same day, when she has the supposed conflict, there are 3 classes at the same time: Ancient Runes, Muggle Studies, and Divination. So any student who is taking more than 2 of those classes would need a time turner. Which makes no sense. It's not even like there's that many classes at Hogwarts, like for real. I think that there were 7 core classes from what I remember, and then there's a bunch of random electives. That's a lot less than even a normal high school, so how could there possibly be a scheduling conflict? And honestly, there's just a lot of weird stuff that happens in the climax of this book. Like, does Lupin only turn into a werewolf when moonbeams hit him? Why wouldn't he just stay inside if that was the case? I always thought this was done for like a dramatic effect type thing in the movie, but even in the book, it's mentioned he turns when the moonlight hits him. And then there's this part where they put Wormtail in handcuffs instead of like, I don't know, stupefying him. Like they know he can turn into a rat, right? And so we arrive at time turners. Let's talk about time turners. Now, time turners aren't the only magical artifact or item or potion or whatever that JK invents that are just blatantly OP, but it might be the worst one. Why would no one have used a time turner to help Lily and James? And why isn't Voldemort constantly using time turners? Even if you say, oh, time turners can't be used to change major events, only minor ones, it still doesn't make any sense. They could have used a time turner to verify Harry's claim that Voldemort was back. They could have used one to determine that he wasn't lying about the Dementors attacking him at the start of Book 5. In fact, time turners were such a problem for JK that she knew she needed to get rid of them, which is why they get destroyed in Book 5. But you can't just destroy spells and potions, JK, and you left Veritaserum and Legilimency alive. And yeah, sure, we're told that a powerful wizard could have resisted those techniques, but Harry's not a powerful wizard. I guess you could say in these instances that the Ministry was willfully ignorant and corrupt, but the fact that no one in the story even suggested them is suspicious. And that's just the beginning of the problems. You know, we have invisibility cloaks, luck potions. Like, even if you can only use the luck potion on a normal day, why don't we hear about people taking them more often? Anyways, enough about that. Let's talk about the Goblet of Fire. So this is actually my personal favorite book. I just think that the Triwizarding Tournament is one of the more exciting plots, and there's a really solid mix of mystery and action in regard to the challenges, and then the overarching mystery of who put Harry's name in the goblet. However, it's the Triwizarding Tournament, right? So we have these other 2 schools that get introduced, and one thing that really bothered me was, why wasn't it brought up that there were other magical schools before this? And like, are there only 3 magical schools? Like, why isn't the world's lore being expanded on just a little bit more here? It's really confusing. Now, this is the book where JK's policy on the Ministry being able to detect magic starts to really get super annoying. See, Harry has the trace on him, and this is how they were able to detect that magic was done in his vicinity. For instance, Mr. Weasley uses magic to deflect objects that Uncle Vernon throws at him, even though in a previous book, Harry got in trouble for using magic outside of school, even when it wasn't actually him, it was Dobby. We know that the Ministry doesn't know who uses the magic, but just assumes it's the person with the trace on them. And you know, originally I wanted to list each instance where JK kind of like abuses this or decides to ignore it, but it happens so much that it's honestly pointless. Like, another example is in the graveyard at the end of this book when he's facing down with Voldemort and all sorts of spells and curses are being slung and cast around. The Ministry should have been able to detect all of that stuff, right? Like, what's going on here? Now, this is the book with the Quidditch World Cup, and I feel like I need to talk about Quidditch at least a little bit. Like, the whole game it doesn't make any sense. I'm sorry, but it doesn't make any sense. The idea that the snitch ends the game, I think, is the main problem. Why would you ever catch it if you couldn't win? And I also find it frustrating that it almost feels like no one on the team matters except for the Seeker. And yes, I do think that the sentient balls that try to kill you actually make more sense than the snitch. And I don't really want to bring too much up about J.K. Rowling herself, but she wrote in a tweet that she invented Quidditch to upset men, apparently. But the thing is, I'm honestly just more confused than angry. The real reason she invented Quidditch was because she needed a sport that Harry could be good at, and she needed Harry to be the star. And the reason it makes no sense is probably because she spent all of half an hour thinking it up. I feel like all you need to do to make the game balanced is to have the snitch be some kind of tiebreaker instead of being an Exodia. That being said, I still enjoy the parts of the book involving Quidditch. Like, I think it's interesting to read and watch. It's just like the rules don't make any sense. Actually, sometimes I really have to question if Harry Potter is even a book for nerdy kids like Rowling claimed. Because I mean, think about it. Harry is a trust fund baby. He's completely stinking rich. He's a natural athlete of unprecedented talent, and his only other skill is fighting. And on top of all of that, he's famous for vanquishing the most evil person in existence, which is something that he didn't even consciously do. How is he remotely relatable again? Oh yeah, he has mean relatives. Okay, got it. I don't think that anyone denies that Harry Potter is about escapism. You know, he leaves a terrible life for one that's much better and more interesting, and I think a lot of people wish they could be whisked away to Hogwarts. And I'm also not here to tell you that escapism is bad. You know, sometimes I think too much escapism can be a bad thing. You know, if we look at anime, for instance, things like Sword Art Online are just, man, it's awful. It's a teenage boy's wet dream. I think this is also a good time to talk about how weird magic is in Harry Potter. Accio, or Accio, I actually don't know how to pronounce it, is apparently a fourth year spell. It seems so basic that it should be taught in the first year. Like, they're making stuff levitate in the first year. Why can't they summon things in the first year? You know, who am I to decide how difficult magic should or shouldn't be? But it just seems like JK kind of like thought up, oh, this would be cool, and then just made it a fourth year spell. And really, would it have killed her to add more magic to these books? I mentioned this before, but a lot of the time the characters are doing like physical things instead of casting spells. Like in the forest with the acromantulas in the second book. Sure would have been nice to have the Confringo spell back then. And knowing that there's a killing curse and a spell that lets you control what people do makes Quirrell seem even stupider retrospectively. And for Avocado Cadaver to be supposedly unblockable and undodgeable, it sure does miss Harry in a lot of characters. And to be completely honest with you, I would rather be hit by Avada Kedavra than I would be Confringo. Like, which sounds better, instant death or being burnt alive? And Harry himself even casts Crucio in the 5th book. Why doesn't anyone ever mention this to him? You know, at the very least, there are more spells than in the early Harry Potter games, where the only spell you ever used was Flipendo. And this is more of a complaint with the magic system in general, but it's really unclear and undefined exactly how magic works. I guess it's a soft magic system, if that's even like a thing, which is, you know, it's totally fine. I don't have a problem with that. But it would have been nice if some basic rules had been fleshed out earlier on in the story. For instance, what determines a successful spell? Is it the pronunciation? Is it the wand movement? Is it both? And later on, we find that you can silently cast spells, and even children were able to cast spells with no wand when they were angry or in bad situations. So clearly the wand isn't even necessary, like when Harry vanishes the glass in the reptile exhibit. It just makes the whole like swish and flick thing and the pronunciation just seem completely pointless. Spells are also pretty consistent in how they're supposed to work. Like, we specifically get told that you can't transfigure things into food, and yet Mrs. Weasley is shooting sauce out of the tip of her wand. Like, I guess maybe she's summoning it from somewhere, but I think JK just forgot that you can't do that. And then things like Skelly Grow can regrow bones, apparently, but they can't fix Harry's eyesight. Okay, so this is a weird thought, but I need to talk about this. Do you guys remember how Hermione gets walrusified in the 4th book by Malfoy? And then her new beautiful tusks grow in long style, and then she stabs Malfoy in the frickin' neck and starts drinking his... Anyways, what actually happens is that she goes to the nurse's room and has her beautiful tusks shrunken. And the thing is, there's this whole plot point about how Hermione lets the nurse shrink them a bit more than necessary because apparently Hermione has buck teeth. And in fact, you know, if you've seen the movies, you may have even forgotten that book Hermione was supposed to be kind of homely looking. There's a certain sect of people that are super against Emma Watson playing Hermione because she wasn't ugly enough, but personally I don't really care. What is kind of interesting about this is that I believe they made her wear fake teeth in at least the first movie, but they definitely ditched this by the 3rd movie where her eyebrows were noticeably styled and her hair was changed to no longer be bushy and to instead have the curls she would wear for the rest of the series. While I think that making Emma Watson uglier on purpose was probably not a great idea, I think that at the very least they could have left her eyebrows and hair alone, as it seems out of character for Hermione to spend a lot of time on appearances. I'm bothered more by the fact that in the movies, a lot of Ron's lines and even some of Dumbledore's lines were given to Hermione. For instance, in the first book, Ron saves Hermione on his own from the troll, while in the movies, Hermione has to tell him exactly what to do, or when they encounter the Devil's Snare. Hermione panics because she wants to create a fire by lighting wood, and Ron has to remind her that she's a frickin' witch. In the movies, Hermione just immediately knows what to do, apparently. Or how in the book, Hermione doesn't know what a mudblood is when Malfoy calls her one, and Ron has to explain it to her. These are things that, in my opinion, actually gave Hermione more personality in the books. It made her a more interesting and flawed character. It also made Ron look like less of an idiot. He looks like a complete fool in the movies. This movie also marked what might be the biggest cut content of any of the book to movie transitions. And I don't really want to harp on it too much because I actually just don't care that much, but yeah, they got rid of spew. Now, I really dislike a lot of the cuts done in the movies, especially cuts to all the magical creatures done in the Hedge Mage at the ending of the book. Do you remember how cool this part in the book was? There was a real sense of unknown in the book where we had no idea what was going to be thrown at Harry, and some of the obstacles were actually pretty creative. Also, I never knew this before, but apparently the spider guarding the trophy was an acromantula, like Hagrid's pet spider. In my head, I always imagined it to be a lot more like spindly and kind of like tall, and looking more like a giant daddy longleg or a giant cellar spider. Another one of the major cuts was done to the Department of Mysteries in the 5th book, which was probably one of the most entertaining parts of any of the books and maybe my personal favorite climax. I'll always be sad that we didn't get to see the Death Eater's head turning into a baby or Ron getting attacked by the brains. Other smaller cuts include things like Voldemort's backstory in the Half-Blood Prince, meeting Neville and his parents at St. Mungo's, various missing Sirius and Dobby scenes, blast-ended Scroots. This is a really weird one, but like for some reason in the movies, Beauxbaton only had women attending for some reason. I don't really want to criticize them for cutting things. Obviously, only so much can fit into a movie, right? Like, but of all the things they chose to cut, I was probably the happiest about spew. Okay, does anyone actually like that subplot? And while these aren't actually book plot holes, I do feel they create this odd sense of disconnect between the movies and the books. I can't really explain it, but the books always felt really cozy and magical to me, and the movies just don't. I mean, I really liked the first 2 movies before they switched producers. Like, there was a lot more light, there was a lot more colors. They were actually wearing their wizard robes sometime too. But then, you know, the new Dumbledore actor killed the old one. And from the 3rd movie on, all of them had this dismal gray overtone. I know some people actually really prefer this style, but for me, this just ain't it, man. That being said, at this point, I've been rambling about this book for far too long. Let's get into the meat and potatoes of this one, okay? This book probably has the plot that is the most easy to poke a billion holes into. And just remember, okay, this is my favorite book. Okay, so I'm saying it has a bunch of plot holes and it's still my favorite book. A lot of the different problems in this book for me circle around 2 different things. Barty Crouch Jr. and the portkey at the end of the maze. So Barty Crouch Jr., aka Fake Mad-Eye Moody, falls into the same category as Lockhart and Quirrell, where I really just don't understand how someone using Polyjuice Potion was able to infiltrate the school so easily. Surely they would have done more to verify his identity. If a bad actor wanted access to Hogwarts, all they had to do was use Polyjuice Potion of one of the students or staff members. I also really question how he was able to teach them about the unforgivable curses, especially when later on we find out that you have to really mean it in order to cast those spells. Shouldn't Dumbledore or I don't know anyone else at the school been a little bit concerned that someone who can really mean it was casting those spells? That being said, the much bigger problem is the portkey. The portkey is completely and utterly irrelevant to the story. Crouch Jr. could have at any point given Harry something that would have teleported him away. But then people are like, oh, well, portkeys don't work in Hogwarts. Okay, first of all, as far as I know, they never actually say that in the book, okay? But I'll trust you for a second that that's just true. Why wouldn't Barty Crouch Jr. just have invited Harry Potter to Hogsmeade, where those rules don't apply? Harry was going to Hogsmeade regularly in this book. He could have easily talked to him there, taken him around the back of the 3 broomsticks and just given him something. And in fact, he could have done this all the way back to the Quidditch World Cup, where his Imperioed father could have easily snuck Harry away somewhere and teleported off with him. Another reason that I really don't like Barty Crouch Jr. is because while we get all of this amazing characterization of Mad-Eye Moody, it all goes to waste. Mad-Eye Moody shows up again in the 5th book, but we don't actually know anything about him. We only know Barty Crouch Jr. Now, JK actually thought about this plot hole because she tried to cover it up in the next book. Sirius has this line where he says that Voldemort wanted to return in secret. Voldemort was planning on sending Harry's body back to the maze to make it look like he just died as an accident. But the thing is, if Harry gets taken away or kidnapped or killed, it's not like people would immediately know that Voldemort was back. And Crouch Jr. also claims that he was helping Harry cheat in each of the individual trials, which of course he was, but all he really needed to do was to help Harry cheat in the maze, right? Like, it would have made sense that Crouch Jr. was helping Harry cheat if it was the total points that actually mattered, which is what Dumbledore actually says at the beginning of the book, but instead the points only matter in determining who goes into the maze first, and instead of the winner being the person with the most points, it's just the person to touch the cup first. So there's inconsistencies here on top of other inconsistencies. There are other more minor problems in this book. Like, I really don't get why no one Acio'd the dragon egg. That seems like it's by far the easiest solution, or why Harry didn't think of that when he was going to Accio his firebolt instead. I mean, I get it, okay? It's a lot cooler for him to ride around on his broomstick than it is to summon the dang egg, but it would have been a lot easier. Or when Harry gets his foot stuck in the trick stair step while under the invisibility cloak and drops the golden egg and it starts screaming while he's out after hours. He could have just Accio'd the friggin' egg or the Marauders map. He literally had just perfected it to summon his firebolt in the first trial. It makes no sense that it wouldn't still be in his mind. In fact, what's really funny is that this plot hole bothered the French translator of this book so much that he actually added a line in about how Harry just forgot to do that. Okay, I don't think that was JK approved, but I like it. And then in the second trial, where Harry learns he'll need to do something underwater, if Harry pored over every book there was on surviving underwater, why would he never have come across the bubble head charm, which both Fleur and Cedric used? This seems like it's the standard solution for wizards traveling underwater. Why would he have not found this himself? I think that she could have easily avoided this by having him come across the charm, but having it be too difficult for him to cast at his current level. Okay, so let's move on to Order of the Phoenix. Now, this is where my personal memory of the book starts to dry up a bit in terms of like the plot holes that I remembered while reading. And I think this might have had something to do with the fact that JK was starting to get a little bit wise to the fact that she had been leaving these plot holes all over the place. And partially, I think this is evidenced by the fact that she went out of her way to destroy the time turners in this book. Okay, so remember how I was complaining about the trace on Harry and how the Ministry can only detect magic when JK wants them to. This is another example of this. The advanced guard shows up to pick up Harry to bring him to Grimmauld Place, and they're using all sorts of magic around Harry, you know? For some reason, that's just okay, and the Ministry doesn't pick up on it. Okay, JK, okay. Then there's this whole subplot about Sirius not being able to go outside and how he's grumpy about being cooped up. And he can't go out in his dog form anymore because Wormtail would have told the Death Eaters about it. But like, why doesn't he just use Polyjuice Potion to go outside? And clearly Polyjuice Potion's completely undetectable magically because Crouch Jr. was gallivanting all over Hogwarts while on it. Speaking of Moody, you remember how he was able to identify that there was a Buggart in Grimmauld Place for Molly Weasley? But like, how does he know it's a Buggart? Like, they make this big deal in the third book about how no one knows what a Buggart actually looks like, but then Moody can see through things, but how does he know it's a Buggart? It must have a true form if he knows it's a Buggart. And how do Buggarts even exist? Like, what did they do before wizards started building closets for them to hide in? Do they need to eat anything or drink anything or, you know, like, do their business? Again, these are inconvenient questions for a creature that I think is actually pretty cool. But still, I have to wonder. Now, probably the most infamous inconsistency from this book are the Thestrals. So we find out that the Thestrals can only be seen by people who have witnessed death. Hence, Harry's able to see them because Cedric's death in the previous book. But there's a glaring problem with this. Harry's seen people die before. Obviously, he saw his mother die, and then for the people who say, it doesn't count because he was a baby. Well, guess what? He also saw Quirrell die in the first book. Now, Dumbledore has this line where he says to see Thestrals, you have to be able to really register and be affected by and process death. But I really don't see how watching Quirrell literally crumble to death in front of him didn't count for that. And some people like to say, oh, well, it's self-defense, it doesn't count. I think that if I killed someone in self-defense, I would actually feel worse about it than if I just saw someone randomly die. And again, I don't buy that his parents' deaths don't count because of how apparently traumatic his Dementor encounters are. Okay, but even if you don't buy any of that, I've got one more checkmate, one more gotcha for you. Why is it that Harry didn't notice the Thestrals on his way back to Hogsmeade Station at the end of the fourth book? Are you going to tell me he didn't process Cedric's death by that time? Because I think that's a bunch of baloney. Checkmate, Potterheads, admit defeat, okay? One of the most popular plot holes that people like to talk about online is something that I wouldn't have even included if it wasn't something that I saw people talk about over and over again, like somehow it's this big checkmate to JK. Dennis Creevey attends the Dumbledore's army meeting at the Hog's Head while he's only in his second year, which would mean that he shouldn't be able to go to Hogsmeade. I don't know why people are so fascinated with this plot hole in particular, because there are literally hundreds of similar plot holes throughout this entire story. At some point, someone actually changes house, I think. And honestly, I barely even remember who Dennis Creevey is. And there isn't really any kind of big crazy plot hole in this book regarding the climax, sadly. I've seen some people criticize Dumbledore for not just destroying the prophecy, but at the end of the day, the prophecy didn't even matter as we found out, and it was just a waste of Voldemort's time for practically an entire year. I guess maybe if he destroyed the prophecy, it would have stopped Sirius from dying. That's the only thing I can think of. Oh, and also, in the fight at the end, why don't the Death Eaters just spam Avocado Cadaver more often? Like, there's this whole big dramatic section where Hermione gets hit by some curse, and it's like, oh no, it's so bad. It's like, why didn't he just use Avada Kedavra, though? Why didn't he just kill her? So I do realize that the character that cast the curse on Hermione was actually unable to speak when he cast that curse. But we see other characters silently casting Avada Kedavra, so I feel like my point still stands. That being said, I understand why the character didn't use Avada Kedavra. The spell he cast was way cooler. It's described as these purple flames, and it does something bad to Hermione that we don't fully understand at the time. This creates a lot of tension, and it also lets something bad happen without actually killing Hermione off. The problem with Avada Kedavra is more so that I don't think it gives room for other spells to exist. So, Avocado Kedavra, you should have never been spread on the toast that is Harry Potter. There's also a couple other things that really bother me about the movie rendition of this climax. First of all, they got rid of like all the good scenes that made this part so cool in the book, but I already talked about that. The main thing I wanted to talk about is, what is this? Like, I know we saw them doing this weird flying bullshit even at the end of the 4th movie, but it bothers me so much. It looks stupid. It looks goofy. They don't need to fly, they can teleport. And honestly, I can't take any of this scene seriously when they're doing that. What is Voldemort doing here? Stop it, you weirdo. Like, I get it, okay? You want the fight to be flashy, but this isn't how to do it. If anything, they should have gotten more creative with the types of spells they were using, like they did in the fight between Voldemort and Dumbledore. Speaking of, that's probably the only visually interesting fight in the entire series. And now on to the Half-Blood Prince. Now, Half-Blood Prince is another story that I think is really a fan favorite. And you know what, guys? I'm a fan too. This is a great book, undeniably. Horcruxes are, as always, a divisive subject. Some love them, some hate them. For me, I'm generally okay with them, but like I said previously, it's pretty obvious that they were retconned into the story. Now, I think most of the Horcruxes, like, kind of make sense. The only one that's really problematic to me is the diadem. It just really feels like JK ran out of ideas for Horcruxes and kind of just shoved this one in the last minute. Especially since Harry just randomly remembers it during the climactic battle of the last book. And the diary being a Horcrux was admittedly a very happy accident for her. Sure, it makes sense retrospectively, but I sure as hell don't think it was intentionally planned. There's also a problem with this being the Harry and Dumbledore book, I guess, if you see that as a problem or not. Really, it just sucks to see Ron and Hermione do so little in this book. I hardly even remember them being in it. And speaking of dumb as a door, got him. Once again, I'm on a roll here. Did you notice? Why did he let Malfoy run amok in this book? Like, he knew what Malfoy was planning. Dumbledore was planning on letting Malfoy kill him. But why did he let Malfoy hurt other students? Like that whole thing with the necklace, that was super dangerous. And then there's a lot of things during the climax of this book that just don't really make any sense to me. Like, why didn't they just kidnap Harry here? I mean, obviously it's because Snape was helping him, but Harry was on the ground, defenseless. They could have just picked him up or levitated him or something. Maybe Voldemort's actually just a massive idiot too. You know what? He is. So we have dumb as a door, and we also have Vol-Dumb-Ort. You know, that's so bad. I can't even pretend that's terrible. Moving on to the Deathly Hallows. Now, controversial opinion, but for me, this is by far my least favorite book in the entire series. Again, this isn't really supposed to be a review video, but I just don't like this book that much. A lot of the magic in Harry Potter for me was in Hogwarts, and with a huge portion of this book dedicated to camping and just pointless arguments between Ron and Hermione, I'm not as much of a fan. It just felt like a lot of the fun in having a wizard school setting, like learning spells or how to apparate or whatever, even them taking their owls, was taken away with this one. Actually, interestingly, it's the least popular late series book, coming in at number 5 in popularity polls, with only Chamber of Secrets and Sorcerer's Stone ranked below it. This doesn't actually surprise me that much though, as I don't think the world building started to get super interesting until the 3rd book, and the 2nd book was just kind of like whatever, I guess. So there's this whole chase scene at the beginning of the book where Harry's getting kicked out of his aunt and uncle's house because he's too old now. Always remember, kids, when you grow up and you're older than 18, you don't actually matter anymore and you're completely disposable. Anyways, because he's too old, he lost the protection of them being his family. And because the Ministry is now under the control of the bad guys, the use of portkeys, Flu Network, Aberration, etc. was restricted in the Dursleys' home. But then they come up with the most genius plan ever. Disguise 8 other people as Harry, using Polyjuice Potion. Wow, guys, remember Polyjuice Potion? Yeah, it's almost like that would have been useful for Sirius a couple books ago. Anyways, though, this makes literally no sense. They could have had a portkey 1 foot outside of the Dursleys' fence, or they could have hopped on their brooms, flown for 1 minute and then sidelong apparated. I don't know, man. Like, maybe I'm misinterpreting this and the Ministry can actually lock down like 100-mile radius around the Dursleys' house, but this just doesn't make any sense to me. And then skipping ahead a lot, there's this whole Ron impersonates Parseltongue bit, which is completely infamous in the fandom now. Honestly, I have nothing to say about this. It's completely ridiculous that he would be able to imitate hissing noises, especially since it's been 5 years. But to move on to the thing we all want to talk about. In my opinion, the Deathly Hallows were 100% retcons. Why in the world would Dumbledore have never mentioned, well, geez, Harry, you know, your father actually left you the one true cloak of invisibility. This is a really magnificent thing. You should really treasure it, Harry. How the hell did Moody's eye see through the cloak of true invisibility? And why did Ron and Hermione never make a bigger deal out of it? Ron even has this stupid throwaway line that JK put in to try and cover her tracks about how he never thought, oh yeah, Harry's cloak is about a bajillion times better than every other invisibility cloak. Listen, there is no reason for these special artifacts to be brought up in the last book unless it was a retcon. No reason. They should have been mentioned in the first book, and they could have been objectives in later books. And if the whole message of the story was the Deathly Hallows are some sort of distraction and aren't important, then why did Rowling invent them for the story at all? And the worst part is, at least in my opinion, the Hallows themselves are just really annoying and they get in the way of the story. Like, we already had the Horcruxes from the previous books for the characters to worry about. We didn't need more magical artifacts for them to freak out over. And if it were up to me, the entire Elder Wand plotline especially should have been nixed. Oh no, Harry's the true master of the wand since he disarmed Malfoy, and technically Malfoy beat Dumbledore, not Snape, was extremely stupid and contrived. Okay, I know this will be controversial, but I would personally rewrite. That's right, I would rewrite the ending of the 6th book so Dumbledore is still alive. Now, he could be imprisoned or something, so Harry can still go on his grand old camping trip JK was just so obsessed with. Now, the reason for this is because if Dumbledore has to die, I think it'd be a lot more interesting and satisfying for him to die in the final book instead of Harry having a stupid fake-out death. Maybe Voldemort implanted the final Horcrux in Dumbledore, and we actually have a legitimately good reason for Dumbledore to sacrifice himself, rather than just because JK wanted Harry to be completely alone in the final book. Because if Voldemort puts a Horcrux into Dumbledore, he would be inside of Dumbledore. Anyways, I could have phrased that better, but you get the point. Dumbledore couldn't fight against Voldemort without also killing himself. I don't really understand the reasoning behind Snape needing to kill Dumbledore in the end. I mean, I get that Dumbledore was dying because of the ring Horcrux, but the reason that Dumbledore states is that if Snape kills him, then Voldemort will trust him completely. Okay, but like, what does that do exactly? It feels like Snape should have done something more important at the end of the book. All he did was get killed and then cry out some memories that him or Dumbledore could have just told Harry. I guess he was able to become headmaster of the school and was able to better protect the children there, but considering they were being tortured for breaking rules, it's hard to see what benefit that really had. The only other reason I can come up with is that it messed with the succession of the Elder Wand from person to person and I guess crippled Voldemort. Though that line of thinking assumes that JK had come up with the idea for the Elder Wand by the Half-Blood Prince, which I guess is possible. I can't necessarily disprove that, but honestly, I feel like I'm really getting into the weeds with this one now. My point more so is that it should have been a lot more obvious what the point of Snape doing all this stuff was, and I never really felt like he was a hero even at the end of the book. Also, I still don't really know why Voldemort needed the Elder Wand. He could have just dropped a load of rocks onto Harry or something instead of needing to do this Clash of Wands bullshit. You know what? I don't care. Do whatever you want. Just get rid of the freaking Elder Wand. I hate that thing. Also, the Elder Wand canonizes, I don't know if I'm saying that word right, but it canonizes the idea that certain wands are stronger than others, which is just a terrible idea. Now, before I end the video, I actually would like to levy some actual criticism at the story because, like I've been saying this whole time, I don't think talking about plot holes is really very critical. I still really like the books, and even though I didn't do a reread for this video, I did do a reread just a couple years ago, except of course I skipped the last book because I hate the last book, but I think they still hold up pretty well even as an adult, and they do an amazing job of sucking you into the magical world of wizards. My only real complaint is that I feel there's an overall lack of character development throughout the series, and any character that does get developed, like Snape and Malfoy, get developed far too late in the story to be really satisfying or interesting. I have a hard time feeling any sympathy for Snape because the whole reason we'd be sympathetic towards him wasn't revealed until he was actively dying. Ron, Hermione, and Harry just like, to me, they feel the exact same at the start of the story as they do at the end. Like, they've changed a little bit, but we haven't seen any really big changes in their personalities. And personally, I think Ron and Hermione kind of got shafted a little bit. Like I mentioned, I barely remember what they were doing in the 6th book, where almost all of the focus was on what Harry and Dumbledore was doing. The only climaxes where Ron and Hermione really get to shine are in the first 3 books. I can say at the very least that book Hermione is a lot better than movie Hermione, who they turned into like a borderline Mary Sue character for no reason. I do have additional critical thoughts about both the books and the movies, but this just isn't the video for that. But before we really end the video, I need to mention the last, the most important, and the biggest plot hole in the entire story. Now this is going to blow your mind, okay? So grab onto the edge of your seat. Where did Ron learn how to drive? Bye!
Ah, Potter has found the sloth brain. Was it clever hunting or a thief's guilty conscience? So where was it, Potter? Within your own head? Bring it to class.